2 years on the job, and how's it going?
Full speed. Full speed.
Full speed ahead.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time. Obviously, in the industry, there's so much change going on. We obviously have a pretty favorable industry environment right now, certainly here in North America, but we're dealing with other challenges from a macro perspective all around the world. So we're balancing all of that and running the business for results for the near term, month to month, quarter to quarter, year to year, while at the same time we're also obviously looking much further out to the horizon. And we've said, a lot of us on the GM leadership team, that we see more change in this business in the next 5 years than we've seen in the last 50. So we're doing a lot to reposition the company so that we can be at the forefront of that change and leading that change at the same time that we're getting everything done, day to day, week to week, and running the business.
Let's go back to what I referenced in the intro. The Morgan Stanley. Did you ever think that you'd be here? I mean, you came from a sheep farm in New Zealand.
Dairy farm.
A dairy farm.
But it's typical that we did try to get the sheep joke in so early in the.
Dairy farm, no sheep. Let's get that clear.
Right.
Right. Okay. But here you sit.
Yeah, it was not part of the master plan. That's for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your thoughts on the auto industry now, a few years into it?
I can't think of a more interesting, more challenging, more complicated, more difficult, more engaging thing to be doing. I mean, this is the single most interesting industry, I think, in the world right now, with everything that's going on in it, and a huge amount of change to come and an ability to make a big difference.
GM hasn't really had a president position for a long time, and you're overseeing all the regional VPs. What do you do?
So one of the big opportunities we've had, and you referenced it in your introductory remarks, is to really take advantage of the full scale and size of General Motors. And historically, the company it's had different operating models over time, but the sort of the most recent phase, if you like, over the last preceding decade or two, was really, in many ways, a series of geographically independent car companies. And what the journey the company's been on over the last 10, 15 years has really been to become much more globalized and to take advantage of global scale where it makes sense, while at the same time preserving the local entrepreneurial spirit in the parts of the business where that's important to preserve. So get the scale benefits where they're most significant, and preserve the local entrepreneurial capability where that's most significant, and strike the right balance in that. And so as part of that, we've had a big opportunity to bring the organization together in key places that we haven't before, and we're starting to see the benefits of that show up, certainly in the financial and operating
That had to be a
results.
huge undertaking. I mean, any kind of transitional shift like that. What were some of the biggest obstacles?
The first thing that we did was really just get people together. A couple of years ago, we got all of our sales and marketing key people from around the world together, and that's the first time that group had spent a significant amount of time together in quite some time. And the more you can establish those personal relationships and have people get to know each other and personally, and also to understand the objective and the mission, and to find out that we're trying to solve the same problem in 2 or 3 different ways, in different places around the world, you can immediately see the opportunity, and that gives people much more context to get after it. So it becomes a identification of the issue and having people see the opportunity and get after it, rather than some kind of top-down edict.
But those opportunities, I mean, we heard them 10 years ago, that GM was trying to rationalize all this and economies of scale, and that was the drive that they were going toward. How do you overcome maybe the missteps of the past and change it going forward? And did you recognize some of those missteps in the formation of your plan?
Yeah, I think it gets back to this I think it's easy to underestimate the importance of the personal relationships, and having people sitting around the table and getting aligned on what the objectives are, and getting agreement that we can all help each other make them happen, and everybody's bringing something to the table and getting after it. And I don't know all of the historical missteps, and if there were, what they were, but that's all fallen into place fairly quickly.
You made some pretty big news last week. You used CES to have almost a show before a show here. The Lyft deal, the Bolt EV, some journalists were driving the car, and we were reading gushing comments. The future of the automobile, one person wrote, right? The most important car GM has introduced in decades. Can you put into context maybe what the Bolt represents for GM? Because it's more than just sales, right?
For sure. I think it demonstrates the capability that we have as a company to identify the market opportunity and what's important to the customer, and to respond to that in a time frame that's faster than anybody else. So what do I mean by what the customers are looking for? Two of the fundamental obstacles to EV adoption, in our view at least, have been range anxiety on the one hand and price on the other. And what we've done with the Bolt is bring together more than 200 miles of range and a price point of $30,000 after tax incentives. And those two things together is completely unique, and I think has the potential to really open up demand for EVs, even in a very low energy price environment or oil price environment where we are right now. And where it gets really interesting is when you take that combination and then think about utilizing a vehicle like that in a different business model or a different operating model. Obviously, there'll be a lot of these that we will sell to retail customers, but I think there's also an opportunity as we see really explosive growth in things like rideshare and high utilization environments where cars are getting used much more than an individual retail customer will use them. It's bringing a vehicle like that into that kind of use case environment where the equation starts to get very, very interesting.
You mentioned, obviously, you're going to sell to certain numbers of retail. How many of those are you going to sell in the first year?
We don't know. The market will tell us.
Okay. Is that a new EV platform?
Yes.
It is. Okay. Are there going to be other models, future models based on it?
We will need to see.
Considering other models?
We'll see what the market does with the first one.
Okay. Did Tesla's intention to come out with an affordable long-range EV kind of motivate you to get the Bolt out and then actually beat them to market?
Well, we were motivated to meet the needs of our customers, and we saw this need to bring EVs, instead of EVs for the elite, we wanted to have EVs available for everyone, a much more accessible price point, and with the performance that is required for it to become a generally useful way to get around, which we thought to be north of 200 miles range. And so those two parameters of price and range and below those performance characteristics, that became the requirement because that's what the customers were telling us we needed to do. And then we just moved as quickly as we could to deliver that, and the results are what you see.
Tell me what kind of gains you could get on miles and on price going forward.
Well, I think we've made a pretty big gain on both of those with the Bolt as it is right now, and obviously we'll look to optimize that further going forward. And like any new technology, the more scale you get, the more impact you can have on price. But we've gotten the cell cost down to, we think, industry-leading levels. We've talked about that, and this is a starting point.
$500 million on Lyft. I mean, you're now a Northern California cool guy, right? I think I saw you in a black leather jacket last week. What's the back?
I don't think so.
What's the back? All right, well, you have no tie on today, so
I might have had a pair of jeans on, that's possible.
What's the backstory behind the Lyft deal? How did that partnership come to be?
We've been obviously watching, it's a little bit like the Bolt story. You go back and you see what are our customers doing and how are they behaving, and are we equipped to meet all of their needs going forward in terms of how they want to get from point A to point B. And as we looked at the urban environment in particular and saw the explosive growth in rideshare, we started to think about, well, why is that and what's going on and why is that happening? And you get down to the sort of inherent diseconomics of owning a car in an urban environment. And I lived in New York City for a long time, and you buy a car for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. You use it a few percent of the time. You pay a lot of money, $1,000 a month, to park it somewhere for the rest of the time so it can sit there and depreciate. And if you had a alien come in from space and look at that model and say, is this the most efficient way to get people around? They would conclude that that's a highly inefficient model to have this expensive asset not utilized. And so that's sort of one thing that's driving, obviously, publications like yours like to write stories about how millennials aren't interested in cars. What they're really not interested in is insurance and parking and all of these things, right? They still want to get from point A to point B. People still want the convenience of a car when they need one without the inconvenience that comes with ownership in these kind of environments. So that equation of diseconomics of ownership, congestion, and then the other big driver is the opportunity that the mobile device has created this huge opportunity cost of the time you spend behind the wheel. So think about your commute. If it's an hour a day or an hour and a half a day, that's lost time because you're driving instead of, you can now be doing other things in that time. So all those things driving rideshare. So we see that, and we see that happening. And then we're talking to people, and we talk with the guys from Lyft. And we find that we have this very common view of what that urban mobility environment could look like in the future, and that we believe rideshare and variations on that will be significant. But then we have this sort of second realization, which is that the first, we believe and they believe, that the first scale deployment of autonomous vehicles most naturally will happen in that kind of rideshare high utilization model way before it happened, way before we're selling autonomous vehicles to, fully autonomous vehicles to individual retail customers. And so with that common view of the future and what it could look like, common view of how we could work together, that was really the foundation for the discussions that led to the investment.
Did they come to you first, or did you find them?
It was really a connection, and then, like any of these connections, you start talking and you find these common areas and this common view of the world, and things unfold.
And you're a board member
pretty quickly from that, correct.
Correct, okay. How do you keep tabs on technology in Silicon Valley?
A lot of it is just talking to people and staying in the flow of what's going on and spending time, not just in Silicon Valley, but with people who are trafficking around in that area. And so that's sort of one part of it, is network and relationships. And then the other part of it is sort of the supply pool or demand pool part of it, if you like, which is where are customers going, what problems do they want to have solved, and what technologies do we need to help solve them.